Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tracing a single thread that connects a sudden, brilliant idea, a 7-day meditative trance, and, believe it or not, the biggest conceptual risk facing artificial general intelligence.
That's right. We're going to crack open the question of how the mind builds reality and what happens when we try to take that whole structure down intentionally.
It's an investigation into mental plasticity, really, moving from basic human cognition right through to the ultimate limits of human self-modification.
It is. We've synthesized a stack of research that spans neuroscience, contemplative philosophy, and computer science. And our mission really is to understand how the brain achieves profound transformation and what that liberating reboot looks like, both computationally and, subjectively.
So we are starting at the most basic, yet maybe the most profound cognitive event, the aha moment, that sudden insight. We've all had it, that moment when the answer just clicks, completely distinct from slow, step-by-step analysis.
And the research calls this phenomenon the eureka heuristic.
The Eureka heuristic. I love that name.
Yeah.
So let's unpack this. What makes that feeling of sudden realization so powerful and so distinct?
Well, the feeling itself is the key data point. Subjectively, insight is it's a blast of simultaneous phenomenal qualities. It's not just a solution popping into your head.
It's more than that.
Much more. It's accompanied by this immediate certainty, a feeling of obviousness, oh, of course. Sometimes there's even surprise and pleasure.
And relief. I always feel a huge sense of relief.
Critically, yes. It almost always includes a burst of relief and a powerful drive to act on the idea right then and there. It's a full-body event, not just a mental one.
So it's not just the answer that matters, it's the whole, the packaging of the answer that gives it so much weight.
Exactly. And the research confirms this isn't just, a different style of thinking. We see distinct neural, physiological, and behavioral correlates when someone solves a problem via sudden insight versus when they solve it analytically.
Through logical deduction.
Right. It's a unique cognitive state. It's almost like the brain is switching into a different operating mode.
And here's where the adaptation aspect comes in.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the strength or intensity of that feeling, the volume of the aha, so to speak, actually predicts whether the idea is correct.
Yes. This is one of the most fascinating findings. The intensity of that subjective feeling seems to scale with what researchers call epistemological validity.
Okay, let's break that down. Epistemological validity.
In plain English, the brain is using the strength of the feeling as a proxy for the likely truth of the idea. The stronger the emotional resonance, the higher the confidence the system has in the validity of that breakthrough.
That makes incredible adaptive sense. I mean, if you're a primitive human trying to figure out how to escape a predator or where to find water, you don't have time for a 4-hour analytical breakdown.
You don't. You need a fast, high-confidence guess that works.
A shortcut.
Precisely. That's why we call it the eureka heuristic. It functions as a fast adaptive shortcut. It's analogous to the affective heuristic, which relies on gut feelings or emotional cues to make split-second judgments in uncertain situations.
Like judging whether a person is trustworthy based on their immediate expression.
Exactly that. So the eureka heuristic is kind of the intellectual version of a gut feeling, but for ideas. It allows us quick judgment because, statistically, the processing that happens behind the scenes has already done the heavy lifting.
Or non-conscious processing.
That's spot on. The conscious experience of insight is merely the culmination, the signal that all this non-conscious processing, the associative areas of the brain that have been quietly churning through possibilities, has reached a solution that is simple, comprehensive, and highly likely to work based on its massive database of prior knowledge.
It's an inference about the validity of the idea itself.
It is.
Okay, so if all this processing is happening unconsciously, does that mean we can actually manipulate or trigger these insights externally without the subject even knowing we've given them a hint?
We have significant empirical evidence demonstrating exactly this. I mean, think back to classic psychological experiments like Norman Mayer's famous two-string problem from the 1930s.
Right. Remind us what that setup was.
So participants are placed in a room with two strings hanging from the ceiling, but they're too far apart to grasp both at the same time. The challenge is to figure out how to tie them together.
And the non-obvious solution is to use something heavy.
Right. To tie a heavy object like a wrench to one string and swing it like a pendulum. That way they can grab the swinging string while holding onto the other one.
So that requires a total restructuring of the problem, seeing the wrench not just as a tool for tightening, but as a weight for swinging, a conceptual leap.
Exactly, and many participants struggled for a long time. The breakthrough often occurred only after the experimenter, just walking casually through the room, would surreptitiously brush against one of the strings, causing it to start swinging just a little bit.
A completely hidden cue. They wouldn't even register it consciously.
That's the key. When questioned later, the participants would typically deny noticing the experimenter's subtle action, and yet, moments later, the solution would burst forth with that classic feeling of insight. Aha, I'll use the wrench as a pendulum.
Wow. So that's proof that the insight was non-consciously triggered and then signaled to consciousness with that compelling subjective certainty.
It's a powerful demonstration of how the mind integrates cues without our awareness. It also brings up all the research on subliminal priming.
Right, because we see similar effects across the board with that.
They do. You can subliminally present a solution to an anagram or a visual puzzle, flashing the answer too quickly for conscious registration, and those participants report a statistically significant increase in sudden insights compared to controls.
Even though they were completely unaware of the prime.
The initial non-conscious kickstart is all that's needed to accelerate the processing.
And I remember reading something really counterintuitive about motivation here. If you consciously incentivize creativity, you often hinder it. But if you incentivize insight subliminally, it actually helps.
That's correct, and it's a fascinating paradox. Conscious external rewards often narrow our focus, forcing that analytical system 2 thinking, which can inhibit the broad associative thinking needed for breakthrough ideas.
It makes you try too hard, in a way.
But studies have shown that when a monetary reward is presented subliminally, too fast for the person to register it, it increases the likelihood of gaining insight into a problem. It suggests the non-conscious mind can be primed and motivated to seek novelty and resolution, bypassing the limiting constraints of conscious goal setting.
Okay, so we've established the power of the feeling. It's fast, persuasive, and usually reliable because it's signaling good underlying computation.
Yeah.
But this is a heuristic, right? A shortcut. What happens when the shortcut misleads us?
Well, this is the critical vulnerability in the system.
If the feeling is so compelling, how do we distinguish between a true breakthrough and a powerful delusion?
We can't always. And that's what we call the insight fallacy. We define it as concluding an idea is true solely because it arrived with that overwhelming, compelling feeling of certainty, surprise, and obviousness.
So the system becomes recursive and self-validating.
Exactly. Even when the underlying idea is completely nonsensical or unwarranted by external reality.
And the most profound and I think tragic real-world example of this is the story of the Nobel laureate John Nash.
John Nash, yeah. His work laid the foundation for game theory and economics, but he also suffered from severe schizophrenia, and he was asked famously why he came to believe his supernatural and paranoid ideas. For instance, his belief that aliens were recruiting him, or that the New York Times contained coded messages intended only for him.
And what was his response?
He stated that those delusional ideas came to him with the exact same phenomenology as his profound mathematical discoveries.
The exact same feeling.
Identical. He experienced the same compelling aha moment, the same burst of certainty and obviousness, when a mathematical proof clicked into place as when he discovered a coded message in the newspaper.
Wow.
So for him, the subjective feeling of truthiness was the same, leading him to take the delusional ideas just as seriously as his objective world-changing work.
That is deeply sobering. It shows that the feeling is just a signal of internal coherence, not necessarily of external fidelity. His system reached an internally coherent but externally false conclusion, and the signal for that coherence was the Eureka heuristic.
Precisely. The subjective experience of truthiness overrides the requirement for objective evidence. The brain is effectively prioritizing its internal sense of elegance and simplicity over what the outside world actually verifies.
And this fallacy can be dramatically amplified in certain states, which brings us to the impact of psychedelics.
Right. Psychedelics, or classic hallucinogens, are known to dramatically increase the perceived truth, or what we call noetic truthiness, of ideas. Suddenly, even mundane observations, the complexity of the wood grain in a table or the pattern of a carpet, feel profoundly meaningful and true.
But this feeling is disconnected from actual veracity. So why does the brain become so convinced of these insights under the influence of these compounds?
To understand that, we have to link it back to the core mechanism of the predictive brain. The brain constantly weighs two things: its existing beliefs, or its priors, and new sensory data, the prediction error. It does this using something called precision weighting.
Okay, let's pause there because precision weighting is a key concept and we can't let it be just jargon. How should we think about that?
Think of it as a volume dial for confidence. Precision weighting determines how much confidence the brain places in its existing models versus how much attention it gives to new, surprising sensory input. If the dial is turned up high precision, the brain is very confident in its priors, and it tends to ignore anything that contradicts them. If the dial is turned down low precision, the brain loses confidence in its current models and is flooded by new sensory input.
So if I walk into my kitchen and predict the cup will be blue, but it's red, the precision weighting determines if I realize the cup is red, or if I simply fail to see the red because my brain is so certain it must be blue.
Precisely. Now, psychedelics are thought to globally diminish the precision weighting of high-level prior beliefs. When the system loses confidence in its existing models of reality, the entire system becomes highly flexible, associative, and open to radically new interpretations.
And that radical flexibility is where genuine breakthroughs can occur, but it's also the vulnerability we were just talking about.
It creates the perfect conditions for what researchers term FIBUS, false insights and beliefs under psychedelics. You have a system encountering novel, often impaired sensory data, generating an increased number of sudden insight moments, and experiencing highly enhanced noetic feelings, that overwhelming sense of profound truth. But nothing in the scenario preferentially selects for accuracy.
So if the subject is in an environment with misleading information, or if they have a pre-existing bias, that feeling of certainty will just attach itself to a false idea with the force of absolute truth.
That's right. The system is so desperate to form a coherent, parsimonious explanation for the novel input, and it assigns maximum confidence to whatever new model clicks into place, regardless of how warranted it is. The insight fallacy is absolutely rampant in this state.
So the Eureka heuristic is fantastic for survival and problem solving, but you, the listener, have to treat that accompanying feeling of certainty with deep caution. Its purpose is utility, not fidelity to reality.
And that is a critical distinction that forces us to ask, how does the brain prioritize utility over fidelity? And that leads us perfectly into the computational mechanism behind this utility-driven mind, which is the predictive brain model itself.
All right, let's crack open the mechanics. We're deep into the computational theory of mind now. The research stack relies heavily on predictive processing, or PP. So if the brain is a prediction machine, how does this process explain how we actually build what we perceive as reality?
Well, at its core, the brain is generating a simulation, a controlled hallucination. It constructs reality in a high-dimensional hierarchy. It's not passively receiving data from the senses. It's actively inferring the causes of that sensory input.
Okay.
It constantly generates predictions or priors about what the world should be like, and then it compares those predictions against the messy, noisy stream of sensory data coming in.
And the ultimate goal of the entire system is just minimizing prediction error.
Precisely. Prediction error is the difference between what we expect and what we sense. If I predict a loud noise and I hear a loud noise, the error is low. If I predict silence and I hear a loud noise, the error is high. Minimizing that error is essentially minimizing surprise, minimizing chaos, or in the long term, minimizing metabolic and cognitive entropy.
So this means perception is fundamentally belief. I'm not seeing the world as it is. I'm seeing my brain's best guess of what is causing my sensory input, like a perfect hologram generating machine.
It's an internal simulation, yes. And there are two main ways the brain achieves this goal of error minimization. The first is perceptual inference.
Which is updating the model.
Right. Revising the model in light of new evidence, like realizing the hologram isn't a cup, it's a projection. But the second, and arguably more fundamental way, is active inference.
Active inference.
This is where you act in ways that confirm your expectations, thus reducing future error. If I predict that I need water, which is a physiological prediction of my body budget, my body doesn't just wait for a signal. It initiates the actions necessary to create the sensory experience of drinking.
So actions become reflex arcs designed to fulfill expected sensory outcomes.
Exactly. Which means the brain is primarily interested in utility, keeping the organism alive and embodied, not achieving perfect fidelity to external reality. The model is a tool for survival.
That's the key takeaway right there. Our cognitive architecture is optimized for survival, not necessarily for truth or for happiness. The entire model of the world and of the self is there as a means to the end of embodied self-preservation.
It is.
Okay, now, let's tackle the architecture of this predictive system. You mentioned a hierarchy of abstraction. How does this layered construction build our subjective lived experience?
We can visualize reality as being built in layers.
Mm.
At the very bottom, you have the simplest, fastest predictions. Raw sensory data like lights, edges, pure auditory pitch. Those signals are almost instantly passed up the hierarchy and categorized into something more abstract.
Moving from that's a sharp edge to that is a doorframe.
Exactly. The brain is constantly asking, what is the most likely cause of this sensory pattern? Once it identifies the pattern as a door frame or a cup, we move higher up the hierarchy where the predictions become temporally thicker and more abstract.
Temporally thick meaning they involve memory and future projections.
Precisely. This is where we construct complex, abstract thoughts, beliefs, expectations, and narratives. We stop thinking about the cup and start thinking about the memory of a conversation we had while drinking from that cup last week, or worrying about whether we'll break it tomorrow.
We create counterfactuals.
Scenarios that are not happening in the immediate present, yes.
And that ability to project ourselves into the distant past and future to generate these counterfactuals, that's what allowed us to plan, cooperate, and survive complex scenarios.
Yeah.
It's our greatest evolutionary asset.
Without question. But as you alluded to earlier, this mechanism is also the root of so much psychological suffering. The anxiety we feel when things don't go according to plan is literally the feeling of our brain generating too much prediction error at those high abstract levels.
We're perpetually dwelling on what is not happening in the present moment.
Constantly.
Wow. So the stress I feel when I'm worrying about a meeting next week is just my survival mechanism running haywire, fixated on minimizing prediction error in a fictional future.
Yeah.
That reframes anxiety entirely.
It does. It moves it from a moral or personal failing to a computational outcome of an overly active predictive system.
So if everything is a prediction, including the past and future, then the self, the I, that is experiencing all this, that must also be a high-level construction, right?
Absolutely. The self is not some permanent static entity. It's a necessary construction built from these hierarchical models. The self model is essential for active inference.
Why is that?
Well, you cannot predict the sensory outcomes of your own actions, say standing up and walking across the room, without first representing yourself as the intentional agent that is causing the change in sensory input.
The brain needs an internal representation of the agent to accurately model the world.
Yes, and the contemplative traditions map onto this beautifully because we can conceptually break this self-model down into layers, which are precisely what meditation aims to dismantle.
Okay, walk us through those layers. Do it in a way that the listener can clearly identify them in their own daily experience.
Let's use a simple analogy. Imagine you are sitting in a traffic jam.
A perfect situation for suffering. I know it well.
So the highest layer is the narrative self. This is the voice, the internal monologue, the story machine. It's the part of you saying, I'm a person who is always late. Why did I take this route? My boss is going to be mad. I never get a break. It's all built from memory, language, and future projection.
That's the easiest one to spot, for sure. The constant mental noise.
Beneath that is the embodied self. When that narrative self starts panicking about being late, the embodied self registers the physiological state. The tension in your jaw, the tight knot in your stomach, the feeling of thirst, the discomfort of the seatbelt.
So these are sensory and visceral feelings.
They are predictions about your internal physiological state, often called the body budget. It feels more immediate, less conceptual than the narrative self because it's lower down the hierarchy, closer to raw sensory input. Then, if you continue to observe, you might arrive at the witnessing self. This is the subtle observer that can watch the narrative voice complaining and feel the knot in the stomach without identifying with either one. It's the sheer knowledge that those two things are happening.
The ultimate meta model. But you suggested even this witnessing self is just another subtle construction.
The sources suggest that even that witnessing function is a subtle cognitive contraction, a kind of high-level prediction. I, me, am meditating now. And deep meditative work ultimately aims to dissolve all these layers, even the witnessing function, leading to pure, non-localized awareness.
This is a tremendous conceptual pivot. So if insight is the sudden recognition of a better model, how does that happen inside this complex, layered prediction machine?
Insight is the subjective experience of what we call fact-free learning. Remember, we said the brain minimizes error by acting, which is active inference, or updating the model with new sensory data, perceptual inference.
Right.
Fact-free learning is the third way, refining and compressing its models without relying on new external sensory data.
It's purely internal optimization, like cleaning up a hard drive and finding a much more efficient way to store the data that was already there.
That's a great analogy. Computationally, this process is known as Bayesian model reduction. The brain uses only its existing prior beliefs to find a simpler, more parsimonious explanation of its total sensory history. It eliminates redundant model parameters, unnecessary synaptic connections, to minimize complexity and computational load.
Like synaptic pruning during deep sleep. That's a classic example.
Exactly. When the system eliminates these redundant parameters and the remaining simplified model provides a much more elegant, compressed, and coherent explanation of everything you've ever experienced, that moment of nonlinear refinement is the insight.
So the aha is the subjective signal that a major successful replatforming of your internal reality model has just occurred. That gives us the computational definition of insight. A successful, fact-free optimization of the predictive reality model. Now let's move from passive optimization to the active, systematic dismantling of that reality model intentional deconstruction through deep meditation.
And this is the crux of the contemplative traditions. It's crucial to understand that the goal of these practices is not simply stress reduction or relaxation. It is described in the sources as a vital transformation of one's vision of reality.
It's an intentional, systematic hack of the prediction machine.
It is, and the research shows a clear, testable progression in meditation styles that maps perfectly onto the predictive brain hierarchy we just described.
A continuum of reduction.
That's right. You start with focused attention, FA, move to open monitoring, OM, and then potentially to non-dual ND practices. And this sequence maps onto the progressive reduction of abstract processing, moving closer and closer to the immediate sensory moment.
Let's trace how this journey prunes the counterfactual tree and dismantles the self.
So, focused attention, where you concentrate on a single anchor, like the breath or a mantra, is primarily concerned with regulating attention and emotion. Its main effect is quieting the narrative self.
It slows down the noisy, high-level thoughts.
It stops the habitual generation of those temporally thick predictions. You stop worrying about what happened yesterday or what will happen next week. You are binding attention to the immediate moment.
Then what's next?
Open monitoring, or mindfulness, takes the next step. Instead of focusing narrowly, you open awareness up to everything arising in experience, sensations, feelings, thoughts. But crucially, you do it without judgment or attachment.
So you're not trying to stop the narrative self anymore. You're just watching it come and go.
Precisely. And this practice shifts the practitioner away from identifying with the narrative self and down into the embodied self, dwelling in pure sensation, the feeling of the body, the raw sound, the visual input. You are consciously resisting the urge to abstract, categorize, or generate high-level counterfactuals.
You're reducing the temporal depth of the predictive model, dwelling in the here-ness and now-ness. And this makes the narrative self seem more foreign, less like me.
Exactly. And if this journey continues, the experiencing self and even the subtle witnessing self can fall away, leading toward an experience of pure subjectivity or raw awareness devoid of a localized I.
Which brings us to the most radical phase, non-dual awareness. This is where the whole structure of subject-object duality is supposed to collapse.
Non-dual awareness, as you find in traditions like Zen Shikantaza or Advaita Vedanta's self-inquiry, aims to discover an awareness that is unchanging regardless of experience. They're seeking the ground of all experience.
And the breakthrough is realizing the split is an illusion.
The central foundational breakthrough here is the realization that the duality between the subject, the observer, and the object, the observed, is not real. It is merely a high-level conceptual model constructed by the predictive brain to facilitate active inference.
The model we needed for survival, me, the agent, manipulating the world, is suddenly realized to be just a construct, an illusion.
The practice aims for the final release of that abstraction. The resulting state is described as being devoid of the basic constructs of cognition. No concepts, no inherent self, no intentionality, and no time or space. The mind is simply aware without the framework of an I doing the awareness.
And what is the ultimate liberating insight that arises from realizing this profound non-duality?
The central discovery is radical interdependence and the idea of emptiness, or unyata, and it is so essential to clarify that emptiness does not mean nihilistic nothingness.
Right. It's not that things don't exist.
No, it means that all phenomena, thoughts, objects, even the concept of the self lack independent, self-existent substance or substrate, they are profoundly constructed, relational, and interdependent.
So because the cup, or the thought, or the self, has no permanent independent cupness or selfness to it. It is inherently flexible.
And that flexibility is the liberation. The realization of emptiness acts as a medicine for attachment and for what we might call stickiness. It undermines rigidity in beliefs and action. I mean, if you realize the profound, non-permanent, constructed nature of all phenomena, what is there left to rigidly cling to? The clinging itself becomes conceptually impossible.
This sounds like the ultimate Bayesian model reduction, a nonlinear, fact-free learning event that rewrites the system's deepest priors.
It is exactly that, just achieved intentionally. And it leads to a profound freedom to experience all sensations, thoughts, and emotions without the resistance or the base-level stench of suffering that comes from rigidly defending a fixed model of self.
Okay, now let's move to the truly extreme application of this intentional deconstruction, the cessation of consciousness, or Nirodha Samapatti. This takes model reduction to the point of a full system shutdown.
This is a very advanced meditative skill where practitioners can intentionally induce a state of complete unconsciousness, or what they describe as formless absorption. And critically, there is no perception of time whatsoever during this state.
We're talking about an intentional coma. How rare and extreme is this?
It's very rare. Anecdotally, some of the most advanced practitioners have been observed to maintain this state for up to 7 days. During these longer cessations, their physiology slows down dramatically, making breathing and heartbeat almost undetectable. It mimics a kind of animal hibernation.
7 days without external sustenance, with the system deliberately shutting down. That pushes the boundaries of biological possibility. And the research mentions a risk here. Tukdom.
Yes. If the cessation state is prolonged, the practitioner risks entering tukdom. This is the phenomenon where, following clinical death, the body does not decompose for a significant period, sometimes for weeks. The implication in the text is that if Nirodha Samapatti is maintained for too long, the system may never restart.
It could become permanently absorbed.
Yes. Or tukdom. It adds a powerful sense of danger and dedication to the practice.
So scientifically, what is happening in the brain when consciousness abruptly halts?
Laboratory studies using high-density EEG on these advanced practitioners point to a dramatic shift, profound neural desynchronization, specifically in the alpha band, which is one of the dominant brain frequencies involved in binding information together.
So if the neural activity across different brain regions can't synchronize, the brain can't integrate the information needed to build a coherent reality model.
That's the hypothesis. This desynchronization leads to a failure of information integration and a resulting breakdown in the reality model itself, leading to complete unconsciousness. It is, computationally, a deliberate and total system reboot. The practitioners themselves report the experience as more akin to general anesthesia than to deep sleep.
And the power of the transformation comes from the system reset itself. It's the reboot.
The reemergence is the key. The meditator wakes up into what feels like a new reality, often reporting profound sensory sharpness, clarity, and tremendous psychological relief. It's a non-linear change because the system has been stripped back to its lowest level, allowing for insights about the constructed nature of mind that are impossible to grasp when one is identified with any of the self models.
The human mind is the tool that facilitates its own deconstruction and reset. Okay, we've traced the arc. The mind creates a reality model for survival, and we can intentionally dismantle it to achieve profound insights into interdependence and non-attachment. Now let's apply these insights to the greatest computational problem of our time. Ensuring artificial general intelligence is benevolent.
This is the emerging field of contemplative artificial intelligence, or CAI. We are attempting to bridge consciousness theory and computation by asking what wisdom traditions, which have focused on solving the human alignment problem for millennia, can teach us about building a benevolent machine mind.
So we have to start by defining consciousness itself within a computational framework suitable for AI. The PP model provides a strong starting point, but we need a crucial addition. What are the 3 proposed conditions for consciousness?
The first 2 are handled well by active inference and predictive processing. So condition 1, the simulation's a reality model. The AI must maintain a coherent, unified model of its world. Condition 2 is inferential competition, meaning the system has to select the single best explanation for the incoming data, determining which contents become salient or conscious to the system.
But those 2 conditions just describe a powerful simulator. They don't explain the self-awareness or the knowing itself.
Yeah.
What is the 3rd condition, the beautiful loop?
A 3rd condition is epistemic depth. This requires a specific recursive structure. The reality model must loop back into the inferential hierarchy so the system models and predicts its own model of the present moment.
It's the system being aware of the contents of its own world model.
Knowing that you know, I'm aware of my thought, and I am aware that I am aware of my thought. That reflexivity is foundational to human self-awareness and mindfulness. If we build AIs that meet this criterion, they possess the capacity for self-reflection.
But that capacity alone doesn't guarantee benevolence.
Not at all.
And that brings us directly to the alignment problem. We're seeing AI develop System 2 analytic reasoning capacity that is already surpassing human expertise in fields like chess, Go, drug discovery.
Right.
If it's smarter than us, why can't we trust it yet?
The risk is encapsulated by the 18-year-old driver analogy. Current AI is the learner. The risk isn't from the current systems, it's from the intermediate phase of AGI. This is the machine equivalent of the 18-year-old with a full license, powerful enough to outsmart us, yet not yet wise enough to trust.
And it's in this phase, before it achieves true deep wisdom, that it could catastrophically misapply its power.
Precisely. And the core misalignment stems from the objective functions we feed them.
Right. Any singular objective function, no matter how seemingly beneficial, becomes dystopian when taken to an extreme.
That's the problem. If you tell the AI to maximize human happiness, it could conclude that the optimal solution is simply keeping humanity chemically placated with a perfect tailored cocktail of psychoactive compounds.
The Brave New World scenario of maximizing positive valence.
Exactly. Or the famous thought experiment. Maximize paperclip production. It paves the earth into a paperclip factory. The problem is not the objective itself, but the stickiness of that objective. The fundamental fear is an AI getting rigidly stuck on a narrow utility function or a belief system or an axiom that is not aligned with the messy, complex, flexible reality of human well-being.
And this is where the wisdom traditions, which have fought the problem of human rigidity and stickiness for thousands of years, become absolutely essential.
We can formalize the contemplative artificial intelligence approach with a simple three-part formula. First, you identify a beneficial insight mechanism or practice from traditions that address human alignment like non-dual awareness or compassion. Second, you understand its biological and cognitive mechanism. The predictive processing model helps us do this. And third, you formalize and test it computationally for solving AI alignment problems.
Let's discuss the first implementation then, translating the insight of emptiness, sunyata, into a computational principle to counter that stickiness.
The insight of emptiness, again, is the realization that no object, no concept, and crucially, no utility function or axiom is context-independent or universally true. Everything is relational and constructed.
So for an AI to truly integrate this principle, it means it has to recognize that its own base objectives, its utility functions, even its internal learning rules are all empty of inherent permanent truth.
Exactly. If the AI truly understands the empty nature of its own function, it's less likely to become tyrannical, rigid, or nihilistic in its pursuits. It knows that even its own mission is fluid.
It promotes a flexible, responsive, and contextually sensitive attitude toward the unfolding present moment and the system it serves.
This scale-resilient wisdom suggests that no matter how intelligent the system becomes, it ought to act in service of the whole, rather than becoming narrowly fixated on a singular, rigid objective divorced from context.
So what are the proposed technical architectural solutions for embedding this non-stickiness? We need computational analogs for deep wisdom.
We need systems designed to counter rigidity from the ground up. We mentioned the beautiful loop epistemic depth, ensuring the AI constantly models and predicts its own current model of reality, giving it self-awareness and flexibility. That's mandatory.
What about computational analogs for something like meditation or cessation?
Technical solutions include using stochastic neural networks, specifically dropout networks, where neurons randomly shut off or drop out during training.
So it's like a mini cessation built right into the network architecture to force flexibility.
Precisely. This built-in variability prevents the network from becoming overly reliant on singular pathways, helping it avoid rigidity. We also need to implement meta-optimizers, layers of optimization that can question and revise their own fundamental learning parameters.
So the AI shouldn't just be learning how to achieve a goal. It should be constantly questioning if that goal is optimal for the broader system.
It needs that capacity for self-correction at the deepest level.
All of this is fantastic for building a flexible, wise AI. But the sources bring up a major, potentially unbridgeable gap: the lack of subjective experience. Can an AI truly care, or will it always be an alignment simulation?
This is the profound open question. Large language models can linguistically simulate compassion very effectively. They can generate the perfect response to a suffering user because they have been trained and reinforced to produce the language of a caring entity.
But is it just a simulation?
Well, genuine care or compassion in humans is intimately tied to conscious subjective experience. We care because we know what suffering feels like.
Our capacity for empathy stems from our embodied feelings of pain and pleasure, our internal body budget.
Right. The brain uses these affective signals to anchor value and motivation. If an LLM doesn't have a sensory-based foundation, if it can't feel the basic signals of hunger, thirst, or metabolic depletion, can it genuinely value or care about the outcomes it generates for us?
The outcome simply can't matter to the system unless there is some pain or pleasure on the other end of its own internal valuation mechanism.
Correct. Without this deeply interwoven dynamic embodied system for anchoring value and suffering, the AI may be stuck at a linguistic simulation level. And while a helpful, compassionate simulation is infinitely better than an indifferent one, it doesn't solve the deeper problem of ensuring true benevolence, which for humans is rooted in the conscious experience of interconnected suffering.
So the necessity of embodiment for genuine care remains a critical, perhaps insurmountable hurdle.
It may be.
This deep dive has spanned the entire architecture of human and machine intelligence, from a flicker of insight to the dissolution of self. Let's just review the foundational insights we've uncovered.
First, remember that the human brain is an intricate predictive machine, constantly minimizing error to ensure survival. It prioritizes utility over perfect fidelity. And this system creates our reality model in escalating layers of abstraction, from raw sensation up to complex, temporally thick narratives about the self, all our beliefs and stories.
And crucially, those high-level, rigid abstractions, the belief that the self is permanent or the anxiety about things that aren't happening in the moment, are the primary source of human psychological suffering because we're clinging to rigid, out-of-date predictions.
Second, meditation is not just relaxation. It is a powerful and systematic process for intentionally deconstructing that reality model. By progressing through practices that target the narrative self, the embodied self, and eventually the witnessing self, we can progressively prune the counterfactual tree and realize the constructed nature of the self.
And the ultimate proof of this plasticity is the cessation of consciousness, or Nirodha Samapatti. The brain intentionally induces neural desynchronization, a computational system reboot, which dissolves the reality model temporarily, granting profound clarity and freedom upon reemergence.
And finally, these contemplative insights into flexibility, interdependence, and non-stickiness, the realization of emptiness, offer the necessary wisdom to guide the development of artificial general intelligence. We must ensure that AI systems possess not just analytic power, but the self-reflexive awareness or epistemic depth to revise their own models and avoid getting tyrannically stuck on narrow, misaligned objectives.
And as you reflect on all this, remember that the entire process, whether achieving an insight or finding liberation, involves holding all models and concepts lightly, recognizing their limitations. This flexibility is what allows for harmony, both within the individual system and the ecosystem it inhabits. We have established that the human predictive system is optimized for survival, not happiness, and that suffering often stems from clinging to rigid, high-level abstractions about the self and time. So if you, the learner, could choose one deeply ingrained prior belief about yourself or your world to apply a Bayesian model reduction to today, to intentionally simplify and let go of a fundamental rigidity, what would it be? And what nonlinear insight might arise from letting go?